I'm going to talk about family histories. Family histories don't need to be those big formal books that you might see at the library. And I want to talk about a different way of writing family history books. Lots of us want to write that big genealogy. I know I still do. But life kind of gets in the way, or maybe you don't really want to tackle that big project, but would still like to share your family history with your family. In 2004, I was just starting to write my big Thal family genealogy. I think I had written 1 or 2 paragraphs about one descendant, and I was trying to be really good and cite my sources and do everything academically. And then my oldest daughter was born, followed 16 months later by my younger daughter. So there wasn't any more time for big genealogy books. And so I really kind of had to figure out a different way to fit my genealogy into my schedule. And in 2006, when my oldest turned 2, I started creating books for my kids. They were personalized. I have a dedication in the front of each one and a current photo of them in the back. I geared them toward their reading and understanding level, according to how old they were. And my oldest child gets the book on her, say, 2nd birthday. And then when my youngest daughter turned 2, she got the same book on for her 2nd birthday, but her own personalized version. As my kids have gotten older, there's a lot more time involved, because the books have gotten more complex, as their reading level is obviously more difficult. But I can still get one of these books done in 3 or 4 months instead of 3 or 4 years, which would be what my guess would be for the big genealogy that someday I want to do. The added perk of this is that I have that deadline of the birthday, and that really forces me to get something done. And honestly, in these years, my oldest is going to turn 17 years old this year, and I've gotten so much done because of those deadlines. So my goal today is hopefully to inspire you. I'm going to show you some examples of what I've done. I'll show you a little bit of what I was able to find. And because in the process of doing some of these books, I found some things I might not have found while I was doing more kind of everyday traditional research. Kind of forced me to get out of what might have been a rut of how I was doing research. And then I'll talk just briefly about putting the books together. So the first book I did was when they were 2. It was a really simple, didn't take me very long at all. It was basically a picture book. It was a poem, 15-line poem. C is for cousins, 1, 2, and 3. Cousins are people related to me, that kind of level of thing. And I collected a bunch of pictures from all branches of my family and my husband's family, pictures that would be interesting for kids, fun kid pictures that I included in the book. One of the things with this one and all my books is really important to identify the photographs that you put in those books. I usually do that in the back, but you got to have those names in there. So age 3, by the time they're kind of wondering what is the relationship, what's an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, all that kind of stuff. My husband and I put the mommy and daddy book together, just basically explained how we were all related and answered those questions. And this also shows one of their favorite parts of the book, especially when they were little, was that annual picture at the back, because that really shows how it's really their book. The next year I did kind of fun one. A is for ancestors, went through the whole alphabet, first explained what ancestors are and who your great grandparents are, that kind of thing. And then we went through the whole alphabet. I was kind of lucky because my mother grew up in a small town called Quinter, and we have some ancestors named Zug. So that really helped. I kind of got a little creative with the X, but an ancestor or a place, that kind of stuff for each letter of the alphabet. That was pretty fun. The next year, I took a fun family story that is in my family about the immigration story, basically, from Europe to America, and how my great grandfather's sister and her family took the train to Toledo. It's a fun story. Basically, the upshot is that when they were taking the train to Toledo, they didn't understand any English, and they missed the stop in Toledo and ended up in Elkhart before they could get turned around. So it's a fun story. I illustrated it with family photographs, but also and this was the first one where I started supplementing with pictures that I could get online. There are a bunch available. I actually prefer sometimes to spend a little bit of money at some of the paid sites for the royalty-free photos, like Dreams Time and that. So that right one of the train pulling away with somebody on the platform, that one was from Dreams Time, and then the one on the left is from Wikimedia Commons, and that's another pretty good source of photographs. The next book, my dad, I was really lucky to have my dad write some stories. He wrote 9 short stories, and we compiled them in a book with a lot of family photographs. And in this case, I just showed a picture here of the picture in the back of the book was with the author. So, my daughter and her grandpa. The next one was really the first book that required a research. My daughter was getting to the age she was reading biographies, and she requested a real biography this time for her book. And so the best subject I could think of was my grandfather, who grew up in Western Kansas more than 100 years ago now. He was born in 1902. So in a completely different era than what my kids knew or know. And so that was the subject that I took. There was a lot more text. There were still pictures, but less pictures. And it was really the first book that required research. I really quickly was sympathetic with the authors that write the historical novels that I love so much, because this had to be a kind of a fictionalized biography, like kids that age read. And so it needed a lot of details. I used county histories from the Genealogy Center here. I used letters and diaries that I had here at home. And I also contacted the local history museum in the town that he grew up and received quite a bit. In fact, they had some old reports that some school kids had written that they sent me copies of, that related to a blizzard I was asking about and that sort of thing. So there were a lot of surprises in what I could find. But my favorite story from writing that book is the Google story. And this happened because I had a letter from my grandfather's cousin written a long time ago, but the one I had been asking her questions, and she said, one thing that for whatever reason sticks in my mind is I still remember my lines from the Christmas play. And she actually wrote her lines in her letter. And for some reason, I don't know why, I Googled those lines, and up came a Google book version, ebook version of a teaching magazine from the early 1900s that actually had the full script of the play in it. And my grandfather's cousin remembered what part my grandfather was, and so I was able to include the whole play. It wasn't very long, but I included the whole text in the book with his part, which was fantastic. It really blew my mind what Google could come up with. So the next year, my husband wrote his set of stories, which were wonderful stories, and we illustrated those with family pictures. And the following year, this was really probably my favorite one to work on, and actually my kid's favorite. I did this almanac of immigrant ancestors when she turned 9, and they had been studying immigration in school, and so she was also fascinated with those kind of almanacs that kids like, with facts and pictures and not too much text. So that was kind of what I was aiming at. And what I did was I took each of the immigrant ancestors that I knew, that ended up being 53, and gave each one a 2-page spread. Mostly on the left, I would kind of be Europe, and on the right would be the United States, kind of. A lot of and arranged them chronologically. And I did my husband's side in green, and I did mine in blue, and it ranged from 1619 to 1899, and probably a fairly typical American in terms of the variety of ancestors. And it was just a fascinating. It was a considerable amount of work, but it was fascinating. It was a lot of fun. I got a lot of the pictures again from places like Wikimedia and that kind of stuff, and my own pictures. So that was a really fun book to do. The next one, um, From Indian Wars to Indianapolis, that one traced my husband's family, the McCormick family. And that was really I don't want to, well, it was a serious history, but it was written at a reading level, not really adult reading level. But it did take some detailed research. I got a lot from about individual military units that various ancestors were in, and the county histories, and worked those into the story. The next one took no research at all. That was a lot of fun. I basically told my stories from the time I was born till the time I was married, and I used my pictures and scrapbooks and diaries to help with that. And no academic research at all. The next one, I was able to get my father to write another set of stories, which was a real gem. And these were written for older kids. He talked more about the Army and other stuff what's not really appropriate for the younger kids. And I illustrated those with his pictures and other things that I was able to find. This one, I just mention another serendipitous uh, finding. My dad had remembered from his time in the Army at Fort Detrick that he had been in a play at a nearby women's college, but he couldn't remember the name of the college or the play. But somehow I managed to find the college online, and I emailed their archives, and they actually had a newsletter that talked about the play and had my dad listed in it. So you never know. It's just an email. That's kind of my motto. It's just an email. It's just a Google search. You never know what you're going to find. The next one I did, I'm so lucky to have my mother's diaries from when she was in high school, and she grew up in Western Kansas in that little town called Quinter. And so basically, I transcribed those and annotated them. I kind of explaining who different people were she was referring to, what some things meant. My mom also saved her scrapbooks. I have those and her photographs, and her scrapbooks include the high school newspapers. So I had excerpts from them that I included. I'm not sure you can see it, but in the pink boxes is kind of excerpts from the newspapers, which are pretty hysterical. And and I also, in the process of doing this one, I was able to connect with 3 of her best friends. My mom passed away several years ago, so I couldn't ask her any questions, but I did find 3 of her best friends who were in the diaries all over the place, and they were able to answer questions for me. We had quite an email thing going there for a while as I was putting this together. The next year, switched over to my husband's side of the family, this is a ridiculously fascinating story of one of his ancestors who was in the Civil War, whose pension file, the widow and invalid pension file, is 550 pages, 8 pounds of paper. And that's because he was actually married 4 times, and the pension department had to determine which widow, and 2 widows filed for the widow's pension for after he died. And so the department had to determine which widow was the legal recipient of the pension. And also there's a pretty significant invalid pension because he would claim to be deaf, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I wrote the book basically kind of from the point of view of the investigator, and included a lot of the excerpts from the pension file because they talk so much about his experience. And so, and I supplemented it with information from newsletters, newspapers.com, and from unit histories and that kind of stuff. He was a drummer, so I looked up some information about drummers and that sort of thing. But actually, the most fun tidbit that I found in the process of this was I put a query on I think it was Kansas Genealogy, or maybe it was a Civil War Genealogy Facebook group, because I knew that this guy was in the Kansas Silver Band, and I was wanting to know about that. And somebody else you searched on newspapers.com for Kansas Silver Band. I hadn't thought to do that. And up popped this personal ad. Wanted correspondence with some nice young lady that is loving who wished to correspond with me. Just please direct to BW of the 15 Kansas Silver Band, and I will answer their letter. The lady must have dark hair and eyes and fair complexion and know how to cook and do other work. So who knew there were personal ads around the time of the Civil War? The rest of the thing is the editor basically decrying what they received in the mail. Well, it turns out that this ancestor was going by the name of Benjamin Wilson at the time, and he was in the 15 Kansas Silver Band, and there was nobody else you can look up the roster of that band, of that unit online, and there's nobody else with the initials BW. And given that this guy was married 4 times, in fact, third time was like the day after this personal ad appeared in the paper, it kind of fits. So it was quite a treasure to find that one. The following year, just recently, my husband graciously took over and did one completely by himself. And this one is very much like a scrapbook with stories and a lot of pictures, which is wonderful. And my most recent one that I did last year, in addition to her diaries, I also have my mother's letters from the time she spent in Paris. She was a organ student, and she was in Paris for 2 years. And I have all the letters that she wrote home. And so I compiled those and annotated them and supplemented those with her photographs and whatever else I could find. So that's a synopsis of basically all the different books that I've done. I just will take a minute, a couple of other ideas that aren't big, huge family history books, other ways that you can share your stories. I'll try to wrap this up. Well, actually, no, it's only 2:45, so we're good. Other ideas for sharing stories. My husband actually did a cookbook several years ago of original recipes, and that's sharing recipes is another good thing to do. And we put a number of pictures in there. A Facebook group. I've started a Facebook group for one branch of my family, and that's fun, although it's not so easy to share a great deal of detail in a Facebook group, but it's a neat idea and doesn't really take a huge amount of time. I've recently revived my family website because and that's not a bad way to share stories either. Blogs are pretty simple. WordPress, Squarespace, those kind of companies, they've really made website creation a lot easier than it used to be. I did a website many years ago, 20 years ago probably, and that was much more difficult than it is now. It's much easier now. Would still take some patience and a little bit of learning how to do it, but it allows you to write about any particular story that you want, share any document, that kind of stuff. A way to do that that's beyond just facts on a tree or a chart like you might put up on Ancestry or MyHeritage or whatever. Another idea, I did do one video of the same story. I have a recording actually of my great-grandfather's sister telling that story that I used for my Paula's trip book back when the kids were little. So I put that together in a recording. The software I use was quite complex, but there are a lot of easier ones that I've found more recently. So that's not hugely difficult to do either, but it does take a bit of figuring out. So those are a couple of ideas of other ways to share your stories. I'll just talk a little bit about how to get started with if you're thinking about doing a book. There are lots of different photo book services out there. Probably many of you've used them already. You may have a favorite. And that's probably the easiest way to start. Snapfish, Shutterfly, those are all good and easy to use. But they're meant really for photo albums with not that much text, although they have developed that in a way that allows you to put more text in them. And there are more options now than there used to be. If you're looking for a book with more text, your end goal is a PDF file that you can upload and use. There's any number of companies that will allow you to self-publish, but I think almost all of them want a PDF. I actually have used Blurb. That's just a company that publishes, because at the time when I was looking for that, they were advertising, and they have a plugin for InDesign, which is the big Adobe publishing software. And my kind of feeling is I imagine the way I want something to be, and InDesign will let me do it. It may take quite a bit of figuring out to make it happen, but I know I will be able to do it the way I want it to work. So, and that plugin allows for pretty simple uploading to Blurb, and they print it and ship it to me. But there are a lot of other companies that you can investigate that will publish your PDF, and you can create a PDF not just in InDesign. If you can certainly do it with Microsoft Word and other software. And a lot of these companies like Blurb will give you the option of selling your book to other people, or you can allow relatives to buy their own. As my books got more toward the more adult level of reading, that was something that I wanted to be able to do because my husband's cousins were interested in some of them and that sort of thing. So you would start with the text no matter what you're doing. Even if you're using something like Snapfish, unless you're doing a picture book that just has one line of text per page, you probably want to write your text out in Word or something like that first, and then copy it into the online software or your design software. After you've got your text done, then you can move on to your layout. Again, your online photo book sites make that really easy. And Word and InDesign are two big options for if you're wanting to tackle designing your own. That's, like I said before, that your end goal is a PDF to upload to somewhere print it out. The photographs are something that I've honestly had so much fun and with over the years. Um, Obviously, you're looking to illustrate the people that you're talking about, but also, look for contemporaries. When you go back far enough, the odds of finding a photograph of your actual ancestor are maybe not so good. But you could find, the head of their company if they're in the military, or anybody else that they might have had contact with. Photographs of places that they were, photographs of things. I mean, when I was doing my own history, the mommy book, as it were, talking about a floppy disk or something even farther back than that, you might want a picture of that because contemporary readers may not know what you're talking about. So obviously, you're going to use your own photographs. The stock photo sites I use a lot, especially to find cover photos. I find it worth a few dollars to get really good photographs from them, and I also feel like you don't have to worry quite so much about having legally being able to use those photographs. Archive sites also, your local archives, or in this case, the picture I've got in this slide is from the Kansas State Historical Society. They had this photograph of a band in a tree from Fort Leavenworth in the 1860s, and this is where my husband's ancestor was stationed. So, it adds something to find some of those photographs. And of course, Wiki Commons and newspaper collections, and of course, Google are all great places to find things. And I always identify the photographs, cite my sources as completely as possible. I've gotten more and more rigorous with that, but and often if you use something from an archive, they'll require that you get their permission to use it in your book. Where I found the good stuff, I think I've covered a lot of this stuff. Obviously, you start with what you have at home. Google, County Histories, our wonderful library here in Fort Wayne, and other libraries, and the local history museums and societies are. I know finding what I did from the small one in Western Kansas. I mean, this is a tiny little county history museum, but they had some stuff for a couple different books that I was working on. So those are definitely worth checking out. And always cite your sources. I know everybody says this, but it's really important. Even in a shorter book, if somebody may use it in the future to do their research, and so it's worth putting your bibliography in there. And if you can include an index, that's even better. When you're all done for these books, if you've had any experience with some of these photo book sites, you probably know they have sales almost all the time. So wait for the sales, because you can get almost 50% off, sometimes even more. Once you're done with your book, it's probably worth waiting for that discount, because the price then gets to be reasonable. I kind of think the price is not so reasonable without that discount, but it's worth waiting for those. And my last one is have fun. You're creating a treasure. My kids are teenagers now. I cannot honestly say they have read every word of all of my books, but I think that in the future they will appreciate having them. I've got my website address there for more information if you're interested. And there are links to a couple of the books that I've done that are of more public interest, and a little blog about them, actually. And there's also a lot of my family information there too.